All right, everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. I have been wanting to do a whiteboard video talking about distributions for a long time, and I have a specific question that I want to answer, which is how many boxes do I need to buy in a mass box opening in order to smooth out the variability and hopefully not get unlucky? Now, obviously we don't believe in luck, but luck is just statistical variability. That's all it is. And sometimes you come out in a bad spot in the distribution, sometimes you come out in a good spot, a beneficial spot. But that's all our perception of luck is. So I'm going to kind of start with some basics of distributions, and then I will build that up into the answer of the question of how many boxes do I need to buy to hopefully not get unlucky. So I have my notes here. I'll just put them there. Hopefully you can't read them so we don't spoil the video. And hopefully they don't fall down. So, basic distribution. If I have a six-sided die and I want to make a distribution of die rolls with that six-sided die, we all kind of intuitively know what that looks like, right? We know that each side on a fair die is going to come up equally often. And so we have 4, 5, 6. And so these are our possibilities, and this is frequency. It's how many times the outcome happens. So you throw a die and you get a 2. So there, we have a single 2. We have 1 2 that we've rolled. And then you throw it again and you get a 4. And you throw it again and you get a 5, right? So now we throw some more, we get another 2, and we get a 3, we eventually get a 6, and maybe we get another 4, and we get a 1, and you all kind of know where this is going, right? You build your robot that throws dice and then uses optical recognition to record what it comes up as, and you give it like 200 die to roll at once, and then you let it run for a couple months, and you roll a couple million times, and what you get is that way at the top, when you've kind of taken the sum of all of these, you'll have a few more of one than another. Maybe one, has a little more variability. But the thing is, up here, you're talking about millions of outcomes. Let me get enough zeros on there. Millions. But it's all fairly even because on a fair die, you expect all the sides to roll about the same amount. They won't be exactly the same amount. But the approximate shape of this distribution is that. It's just straight across because all outcomes are equally likely. And then what's the average of this distribution? And again, this is kind of a question that we intuitively know, but we don't understand how we know it. The average is 3.5. Because if you take 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6, it's 21, and 21 divided by 6 is 3.5. And so the average is right in the middle. And the really interesting thing is, if you draw it like this, as areas, enclosed areas, and you took this area in here, and you measured it, and then you took this area to the right, and you measured it, it would be approximately the same. And so the average is the line that cuts through the center of the area as you go across this axis. So you march across this axis until the area to the left of the line is equal to the area to the right of the line. And the really interesting thing is, from about the 1500s to the early 20th century, there were all of these really cool ways to accurately draw stuff on a piece of paper and then measure that area because we didn't have computers to do it. And so when you needed exact solutions to things, that's how you would do it. And there's just some really fascinating ways to measure area on a piece of paper that came out of that. But the average is going to be where you have equal area left and right of some value, and that value is the average. And so the average here is between 3 and 4, and so it's 3.5. So we all kind of understood going into this question how a six-sided die work. And so now we can kind of see how a distribution of six-sided die rolls works. So let's go to a box of cards. We are just going to theoretically open one box of cards. So this is not the average of the population of all of the boxes of cards from that set, all of the similar ones. We're just going to take one off the shelf and we're going to open it. And so this is going to be the value, and again, this is frequency. And so what do you expect in a box of cards? You expect a whole bunch of land, a whole bunch of garbage commons, basically stuff that has a value of maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cents. So you're going to have a huge number of cards. And so that bar, this is a histogram, and so it's measuring, how many cards are at the not 2 cent mark, we'll just say 2 cents. And it's, you start counting them and you get, in a what, 540 card booster box, there's probably like 200 of them or something that are this lowest value. And then the next one, there will be slightly fewer cards at, maybe this is 4 cents or whatever. And then there will be slightly fewer at the higher. And this falls off in some kind of shape. And then you end up with a tail out here that keeps falling off. And you eventually get out to your really valuable cards, your foil borderless ancient copper dragons. And so the curve that you can approximate over this looks, it looks something like this. And so it has a huge amount way out here that are fairly worthless, and then it has a small amount way out at the end that have high value. And of course, those are your mythics and your variants and things like that. And so where might the average card value be? Well, it's where it's along the horizontal axis here, where the area to the left equals the area to the right. So, we're just going to kind of eyeball it. Maybe it's somewhere around here. And this is on a single box of cards, just one random sample you took off of the shelf. So the interesting thing about this is if you go to Dawn Glare and you look at the visualizer and you just put one set into the visualizer, this is what they show, except they reverse the axis because they show high value cards on the left side, and then you scroll to the right of the screen and you get down to the low value cards, and they show them from top to bottom. And so they show this kind of like upside down version where they're like, oh, here's your copper dragons, and here's your silver dragon, and here's your archivist and whatever else, and but then there's a couple cards of this value, and you get way out here, and then it's like, here's a whole ton of cards that are $4, and an even bigger stack of cards that are $3. And so what's interesting is if you take this and you just turn it up 180 degrees, it is this distribution. And they're showing you the same thing on Dawn Glare. Okay, so now what happens if we open a bunch of boxes? And that average that I showed right here a second ago, that average was the average card within a box. And we really don't care about average card. Nobody ever says, like, how valuable is the average card in a box? Maybe the only time I can remember even contemplating that was with these Lost Legends cards that'll be in the Dominaria United collector boxes. But besides that, we're almost never interested in what is the average value of all the cards within the box. What we're interested in is what's the total value of the box. So let's say we go out and we open a bunch of boxes. Okay. So we're going to talk about Commander Legends Draft because that's what we're talking about a lot recently. And, we're going to call this $130 and $140, $150, $160. And we'll go this way, $120, $110, $100, and this will be the $90. Okay. And let's say we go out and we take a random box and we open it and we sum up all the cards, and we can say all the cards above $1, or we'll do all the cards above $1. Let's say that it's going to be somewhere around $130 is the average we're going to get, but not every box is $130. And so you're going to have some boxes, maybe you open your first box and the value of that box is right at $130. All right. And you open the next one and it's 110, and you open another one and it's 140, and you open one here, and then another 130, and you start opening more and more boxes, and you build up this distribution. And what do you think this distribution looks like? Well, it is less skewed than the card distribution within a box. It's a little more normal, we might say, which means nicely behaved and symmetrical as a distribution. We'll get there. So what you might see is that very few boxes are out here at the lower cost. And this is an interesting thing about MTG Box Sim. You know, you can sit there and you can just click Simulate Box over and over. And eventually you'll probably see a box that has like a value of $30 because it just gets skunked on everything good. But it's very rare. Most of the boxes will be in this area. And so what this distribution looks like is this. Now, it's not symmetrical, it's not normal, but it tails off on the higher end a little bit. And that's what you see when you actually go on MTG Box Sim, and every time you hit Simulate Box, you copy the value into a spreadsheet, and then you put the data in different buckets, and you actually plot the histogram. You will see that it tails off at the higher end because there's always a chance that you'll grab those borderless foil ancient copper dragons and the silver dragons and, you know, the real money cards. There's a chance to get one or two of those. They can vastly change the value of that box. So this is just the average, the distribution of box values. And where's the average? Well, you know, we already kind of a priori knew because we calculated it. It's right there. It's right at 130. And the interesting thing is this long tail, that little bit of area you added, every little incremental value out here of this long tail, that's what gets you to an equal amount of value as this big hump over here. And so that's why your average is there. Now, the interesting thing we want to know is if we open a bunch of boxes, how safe are we in not deviating too far from the box average? And again, we kind of know that the box average is $130 because we used MTG Box Sim and we made some adjustments based on maybe cards that MTG Box Sim doesn't consider, or we made some discounts based on cards that it does consider that it shouldn't, and that's a whole nother messy topic. But now let's say we know this distribution here, and we want to open a bunch of boxes, and we need to know how many to open to hopefully protect ourselves against the variability. So let's say we're going to do a box opening of 10 boxes. So we'll do n equals 10. And we go and let me just redraw that last distribution here. I'll just redraw it like that. Okay. So we go and we open 10 boxes and say, you know, we pick them from all over this distribution because it's a histogram and you're just randomly getting a point under this curve, and then you're seeing where it is on this horizontal axis, and that's the value. So we take 10 samples here and we average them and we say, what's the value? Well, let's say that the first time we do that, the value is 120. Oop. Okay, 30, 140, 110, and we'll take this out to 150. Okay. And then let's say we go to our buddy, and our buddy also opened 10 boxes. And so he played this game, and he opened 10 boxes, and he said, bro, I got $130 average. All right, that's good. And then we go down to our local card store, and we talk to an infinite number of other people who each open 10 boxes. And what we get is we start to get a distribution, and you know, it won't necessarily, you won't find the numbers in the order that I'm drawing them here, but over time what you'll get is this distribution, and the curve of it looks like that. Now this is getting closer to a normal distribution, and maybe one of you guys in the audience who's better at statistics than I am can tell me, is this a normal distribution at this point? I'm not quite sure. It's close to symmetrical and it's close to normal. It's well behaved, we might say. Okay, so what happens if we then say, well, you know what? Instead of opening 10 boxes, I'm going to open 30 boxes. And we get all our bros together who can each open 30 boxes, and we ask them what their results were. Well, what they're going to see is a curve like this. Because they each opened more boxes, they got closer to the average. More of them got closer to the average. And so this curve of the results of each of their individual box openings, it gets more and more squished towards the average. And so more of the results are closer to the average price, which is this 130. Okay, so now let's say we take this to n equals 100. What do you expect to see? Well, you expect it to tighten up even more. And if we go to the ridiculous cases like n equals 600, you basically expect it to look like this. You know, virtually nobody ends up with the $120 average. It's very hard to, because the actual real box average is 130 bucks. And if you open 600 boxes, you're going to be pretty close to $130 for each one. And so that's why the ends of these tails actually move in, and this gets taller because, again, the vertical axis is frequency. And so more of the results will be up here, more of the results will be at the average. We'll just do AVG. They'll be at the average right there. Okay, so we want to know a number though. How can we figure this out? As you go from opening 10 boxes to opening 600 boxes, your potential outcomes go from being anything along here and even having decent chances of being, points down here. It goes from that to being very, very safe. If you're going to open 600 boxes, you know what your average is very likely to be. And so how many does that take? So the way that you get this answer is you do what I did. You go out to Google and you start trying to type in your question into Google, and then you come across some Stack Overflow posts, and you figure out that, yes, the mathematics for this already exists. It's called standard error of the mean. And so the way standard error of the mean works is it says if you had this distribution, which was boxes, you calculated the average and you calculated the standard deviation. And for these Baldur's Gate draft boxes, the standard deviation sigma was right at $35. It was pretty close to 35. And what that means is that $35 is about how far you have to go from the average to capture most of the points. And so when we get up here to this level of doing box openings, like mass box openings, the standard error of the mean, which is like the standard deviation of possible outcomes here, is that sigma divided by square root of n. And so the interesting thing about that is that because these are closer to normal distributions at this level, your standard deviation takes on the classical meaning that one standard deviation from the mean, so, this far, is, so I'll do this, one standard deviation is, and here's where I need my notes, it's about 68% of all cases will be within there. And then you have 2 standard deviations and 3 standard deviations. And really, to me, 1 standard deviation and 3 standard deviations are the only interesting ones. And so if we're willing to go 3 standard deviations above and 3 standard deviations below the mean, we should capture 99.8% of all the data points. And when you have a normal distribution, that's one of the nice results of that, is that your 3 sigma will capture almost all of the points. And so your sigma value that you get from here divided by the square root of n will give you your standard error of the mean, and I forget what Greek letter that gets. The interesting thing you can infer from this is that as n goes up, the standard error drops, because as n gets bigger, this denominator gets bigger, which means that the whole quotient here gets smaller, and that's exactly what we see. The curves get narrower as we went up in number of boxes that we open. So what did I actually get using the numbers for Baldur's Gate draft boxes? The average EV for the box was about $130, and this was again a composite estimate that I made on a previous video, maybe about 2 weeks ago now. And the standard deviation was $35 that I've written here. And for my little mini mass box opening of a mere 17 boxes, what you get is that the 1 sigma, let's see, let me erase a couple of these things so I have room. For n equals 17, the 1 sigma is $8.62. So what that means is that if each of us watching this video goes out and we buy 17 draft boxes of Baldur's Gate, and we all open them, and then we all get back together and we share our numbers, 68% of us will have gotten an average box value that is within $8.62 above or below the average of $130. And so it'll be between $121.38 and $138.62. And then the 3 sigma value is 3 times that, $25.87, and it means that 99.8% of us who go out and buy 17 boxes will be within $26 below this 130 to a range of $26 above this 130. And so it gives us the idea of what are our odds of being within certain ranges depending on how many boxes we open. Now, something interesting to do with these numbers is to divide both of them by the average EV. And the reason you might want to do that is because when we're talking about mass box openings and margins and profits and revenues and things like that, one of the things we're interested in is what might my profit margin be, and how can that be affected by bad assumptions or market movements or things like that. And so what you might want to know is what is the standard error of the mean that you might get as a ratio of the average box cost. Because what that will tell you is in terms of the total revenue, as a ratio of the average EV. Because that will tell you as a percentage of the revenue you might expect to make, what does this uncertainty contribute? And so if you take these numbers and you divide them by the 130, you get 6.6% and 19.8%. Okay? And so what this means is that, again, if all of us go out and we buy 17 boxes and we come back and we compare our numbers, 68% of us will have a possible variation of up to 6.6% different revenue. It means higher or lower than the average of all of our revenues. And so if you're concerned with things like, hey, maybe the margins are really slim on some particular product, and you think maybe there's only a chance of 3 or 4 or 5% revenue, but if the 1 sigma standard error of the mean tells you that your variation would be 6.6%, then you're running a very high risk that the particular boxes you just happen to get off the pallet are going to be ones with bad cards that do not pay for the money that you're putting into it. And so that's why normalizing it to the average EV of the boxes gets you this percentage number that's really useful. So what if we take n equals 100? So, we get all our high rolling buddies and we go out and we all open 100 boxes and we come back and we compare. The 1 sigma variation came out to $3.56, which was 2.7% of the average. And the 3 sigma variation comes out to $10.67, which is 8.2% of the average. And so you see, as you open more boxes, that distribution gets slimmer and taller, and the amount of variability that you might see decreases. So by going from 17 boxes to 100, we decrease the possible variability. And the nice thing is, now, normalized to the average box price, the average box EV, you only have 2.7% revenue risk at the 1 sigma interval for you to get unlucky in. And so to finally answer the question of how many boxes should I open, you have to realize it has to do with the standard deviation box to box, the number of boxes, and then to put it into a term that we can really apply usefully, it also varies by the average EV of the boxes. And so I took those and I solved for the N that gave me, let's see, what did I solve for? 5% chance. So what I got was at an N of 30, $6.49, which represented a 4.97% chance. And so there is no exact answer here. The answer is it depends on how much risk you're willing to take. And so what this means is that 68% of the time, when you open 30 boxes, you will be within 5% of the average EV. And if we take this to the 3 sigma numbers, this one ends up being 14.91%, and that's $19.47. And so it means that at 30 boxes, 99.8% of the time, which is not guaranteed, but hey, it's pretty close, 99.8% of the time when you open 30 boxes, you will be at least within 15% plus or minus of the average EV for the total value of cards you pull from the box. And so you have to understand that there is no exact solution. The answers are, well, odds are you will be within this interval, or there's a percent chance that you will be within some range. And so you have to figure out what kind of risk you're okay with. And, you know, if you run these numbers up to like 600 boxes, these percentages just shrink and shrink and shrink to the point where you're on the mean, you're on the average, you're at that 130 value, and these percentages become very small. So let me know what you think about that. If you learned something, if this explanation was good enough. One last thing I wanted to throw out here for distributions. You know, distributions don't have to look the way that I've drawn them here. Depending on the situation, distributions can look all kinds of different ways. And I actually wanted to talk about this for a while. What is the distribution of specking? If you go onto RMTG Finance on Reddit and you spec on garbage modern cards with those guys, what does that distribution look like? It starts over here, negative. And then it does this. And the reason being that a lot of these bets, they turn out negative. Essentially, the people are stuck with the cards and they can't get rid of them without paying additional shipping and market fees to get rid of them. And so the cards have negative value. Now, they don't have to pay that value, but the value of them is negative. And then a whole bunch of specs have very low returns. And then way out at the tail end, you end up with specs that have good returns. And these are your lottery tickets. And essentially in the same way, if you go to a casino, what does the distribution from a night at the casino look like? Well, it looks about like that, right? And no, you're not lucky. You're not the guy who always wins. No. Most of the time you lose money and you are negative for the night. Occasionally you win a little and sometimes you win a lot. Very rarely. Way out there. So your distributions don't always have to be continuous. There can be large areas in here where there are no outcomes. That's perfectly possible. So let me know if you have any follow-up questions to this, anything I did egregiously wrong. I use these kind of statistics in my professional job, kind of, but one of the things you realize about advanced mathematics is you have advanced mathematics at the level that you learn it in college, where you get down into the nitty gritty and the proofs and everything. And then in the real world, in the business world, you use approximations and you use good enough mathematics to actually get shit done. So let me know what you think. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join me on Final Trade. Thanks a lot.